Hey guys, just wanted to check in and say that I hope everyone is coping, relaxing, and entertaining yourselves while we all deal with the current situation. I'm working hard as ever, which is easy to do when you enjoy researching true crime stories as much as I do. Especially the way true crime has layers, like an onion or an ogre, and the more layers you uncover, the more interesting it gets, just like Best Fiends. As I've mentioned, Best Fiends is the unique and challenging puzzle game that could fuel your competitive streak or calm your nerves. It's casual. The levels aren't timed, so there's no added stress from something that's supposed to be fun. Play wherever and whenever you want, no internet or Wi-Fi required. I'm currently on level 548 and it's just as challenging as ever. I'm still enjoying the monthly themed challenges and adding adorable new characters to my collection. Now is as good a time as ever to join in, so we can play alone together. Best Fiends has thousands of levels already, with new levels, events, and characters added every month. It's hours of fun at your fingertips, and you can even play offline. With over 100 million downloads and tons of 5-star reviews, Best Fiends is a must-play. Download Best Fiends free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. He missed school the following day, and when a friend saw him later, he noticed he seemed sullen and exhausted. The friend had been voted Mr. Grapeland High School and Napoleon his runner-up. As the pair walked together to have photos taken to commemorate these honors for the yearbook, Napoleon spilled his story to his shocked classmate. All of the questions you too would ask came out of his friend's mouth, but Napoleon had no answers, only saying that it would have been better had they gotten the Mercedes. That was the only person Napoleon would confide in, although Fig told his stepdad and his girlfriend. For the next 46 days, Napoleon simply went through the motions, working out to extremes and going to church whenever he could. His mother said he seemed distant but focused. She felt he was maturing. With the class of 1994's graduation 2 weeks behind him and the Marine Corps just 1 week away, a Crime Stoppers tip led authorities directly to Grapeland. Carjacking is a federal offense, resulting in the FBI showing up in the quarters. Cedric began cooperating first, and when Fig found this out, he changed his story to a different one. He was transported from Grapeland to Tyler, where his second interview was recorded. We know now, of course, that not much of what he told investigators about Napoleon that night was factual. The brothers were arrested on 1 count of carjacking and 2 counts of using or carrying a firearm during a crime of violence. Their interviews led to Mrs. Beazley's Ford Probe being confiscated by the FBI around dinner time. She also watched as they searched the tree line across from her house. This is where they found the murder weapon, where it had been tossed on the night of the killing. She called her husband, who called their son to find out if he knew what was going on. He assured his father that he didn't. As midnight approached that night, June 6, 1994, the FBI arrested Napoleon at his grandmother's house in nearby Crockett, Texas, where he had gone to spend the night as authorities were closing in. The judge set his bond at $1 million. Since the murder of John Luttig occurred during the commission of a robbery, in this case carjacking, Napoleon's offense was eligible for the death penalty, still legal in Texas in 1994. The following spring, Napoleon went to trial and was found guilty of capital murder. In order for the death penalty sentence to be handed down, quote, future dangerousness needed to be proven. The state of Texas had to submit evidence proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Napoleon was likely to be violent again in the future, and that nothing could be done about it. The factors taken into consideration did not include his age or his lack of a criminal history prior to the murder, They did include, however, his admission to selling crack and carrying a gun, and the Coleman brothers' false statements. They had said he desired to kill someone to see how it would feel and that their lives had been threatened in return for silence. The brothers claimed that Napoleon had no remorse for the crime. The district attorney said, quote, "This was a deliberate, pre-planned, cold-blooded crime that showed a wanton disregard for human life. The facts of the crime itself were sufficient to prove future dangerousness." Judge J. Michael Luttig's thought-provoking testimony at Napoleon's trial said, quote, "Words seem trite in describing what follows when your husband is murdered in your presence, when your father is stripped from your life. The horror, the agony, the emptiness, the despair, the chaos, the confusion, the sense, perhaps temporary but perhaps not, that one's life no longer has any purpose. The doubt, the hopelessness, there are no words that can possibly describe it and all it entails. You sit at Thanksgiving dinner, the dinner that your wife has prepared that at all other times would be a feast. You sit there with your mother and your wife and your daughter and no one says a word. Not a single word. There's only one thought in all four of your minds, and that is that your dad's not there and he never will be again. You make small talk, you pretend like nothing has happened and that there is nothing else on your mind. You tell your wife that the meal tastes great when you can hardly keep it down, and then you get up and you go do the dishes so that they won't see you crying. When I told my mother that the FBI had arrested 3 people, she collapsed on the floor of the kitchen. It was a writhing kind of pain I had never seen in my life. Then the trial begins, and you listen to your mom talk about how she crawled on the floor in the filth and the grease of the garage of her home to keep from being murdered by the people who had just murdered her husband. You listen to the pain and you watch her face. There are no words for it. You know, the idea of this elegant woman, my mother, crawling on the garage floor to keep from being murdered, that's something that you have to live with for the rest of your life. Napoleon had plenty of respected witnesses appear on his behalf as well. However, after 2 hours of deliberation, the jury recommended a sentence of death. Listen to what one juror had to say when interviewed for the short film 2 Hours to Tyler.
To look in and beyond a person's mind and heart, look in their soul and seeing, what's the purpose or possibility of rehabilitation in this case? I didn't see any concern on his part. Who's to say as to what would set him off to discard somebody else or off somebody else? You want a jury panel that doesn't have biases. And I feel that's the panel of jury panel that we arrived with. I didn't see evidence of any type of bias one way or the other. Napoleon Beazley made a terrible mistake and choice, and it cost him his life of his own choosing. Mr. Luttig, it cost him his life. He didn't have a choice in the matter.
Over the next 6 years, numerous petitions, appeals, and motions for things like habeas corpus relief were denied at both the state and federal levels, and Napoleon's execution date was scheduled for August 15, 2001. The defense had alleged that accommodations had been made on behalf of Judge Luttig. However, they were unable to prove it, and the judge and the prosecutor steadfastly denied the accusations. In fact, both the judge who presided over his trial, as well as the Houston County District Attorney, a Grapeland resident, urged reconsideration of the sentence they considered drastic. The judge wrote Governor Rick Perry, quote, "It is my recommendation that due to his age at the time of the offense that you consider carefully and grant his request that his sentence be commuted from the death sentence to a sentence of life imprisonment." The Houston County DA wrote the State Board of Pardons and Parole saying, quote, "Bottom line, Mr. Beazley is a young black man from a small community who could have done great things in his life because he was charming, smart, respectful, and a genuinely good kid. He was a fool to be influenced by his co-defendants and a fool to act like a common street thug. He made a terrible mistake this one time, but I hope you will consider his background, his remorse for the sorrow he has brought to the victim's family as well as his own, and the fact this is an isolated incident and commute his sentence to life in prison. Based on my knowledge of Napoleon Beazley as a person, as well as my knowledge of the facts of his criminal offense, I would not have sought the death penalty had this case been filed in Houston County. She later told the New York Times that, quote, "He just comes from a really good family. I know who this kid is. I don't see how they prove he is a threat to society." Although the board then had their closest vote in the last 100 cases they had reviewed, and voted to commute his death sentence to life without parole, the governor didn't bite. He did not commute the sentence, saying, quote, "I am comfortable that my 17-year-old son knows the difference between right and wrong, and the law in the state of Texas says a 17-year-old has to take responsibility for his actions. My duty is to uphold the law." The defense team's next step was to motion the U.S. Supreme Court to intervene at the federal level, filing a clemency petition. They wanted the opportunity to prove that executing juveniles constituted cruel and unusual punishment and violated international covenants. But 3 Supreme Court justices personally knew the victim's son and thus recused themselves. With only 6 remaining, the vote deadlocked and the execution would go on. But the defense had also filed a petition with the State Court of Appeals pointing out that he was a juvenile and a black teen convicted by an all-white jury. Not only that, but by then the Colemans had recanted their false statements and were willing to testify again at a new hearing. On August 15, 2001, the day of his scheduled execution, and with only 4 hours remaining on the countdown, the appeals court voted in Napoleon's favor, saying only that the decision was pending further orders from the court. He had already said his goodbyes to family and had stated at his initial sentencing hearing, quote, "It's my fault. I violated the law, and I violated a family, all to satisfy my own misguided emotions. I'm sorry. I wish I had a second chance to make up for it, but I don't." In 2000, he told CNN the following.
I was 18 when I got here, and they called me youngster because I was the youngest guy here. My parents, especially, they blame themselves a lot. I can see it in their eyes. A lot of times they look when they come down and visit me every week, and they want to blame themselves for me being here. And I try to let them know that, it's not their fault, that I made decisions in my life that got me here.
8 months later, in April 2002, a final decision was made and his appeal was rejected. The trial judge was required to set another execution date. Following Napoleon's initial sentencing, the judge had come out in protest of the sentence, as I mentioned earlier. At this last sentencing hearing, she set the execution date for 32 days away, May 28, 2002, as she was required to by law, but used the opportunity to make clear her, quote, "principled objection to the practice of executing juveniles." At the very time that this final appeal for clemency was rejected, Christopher Simmons received a stay of his execution date in Missouri, also scheduled for May 2002, for a murder he committed the year before Napoleon. This will be the case we cover on the next episode. The defense rushed to appeal directly to Governor Perry as well as the Court of Appeals, explaining that the state of Missouri had used arguments similar to his to stay Christopher Simmons' execution. He found it only appropriate that Texas act accordingly. The governor did not respond, and the Court of Appeals voted down the request. On May 28, 2002, Napoleon Beazley was executed by lethal injection at the age of 25, almost exactly 8 years after he graduated from Grapeland High School. His mother and younger brother had visited Napoleon every Saturday for 2 hours for the entire length of his incarceration. His father came often, but he switched out with other adult family members so more people would get to see him. Napoleon was executed 3 days after his little brother graduated the same school, also captain of the football team. His funeral drew over 700 people. Napoleon's family did not watch him die or even see him that day per his request, though they were on the premises.